Welcome to Facets of the Stone. I'm Kevin McAfee, and I'm with Jeanne Nigro. And Jeanne, your ministry has constantly been so busy teaching about the biblical feast, and we have another opportunity to study today.
We do, and today what we're going to talk, it's interesting that you say we're so busy filming, because we are going to be talking about Shabbat.
Yes, and that's the opposite of going fast, which is what our entire microwave industry, everything about our lives is fast. I know as a dad, I'm constantly trying to know on my iPhone, in my apps, in the technology of computers, in the digital age that we live in, how I can communicate to my sons, to my daughters, to my family. And we do. We live in a fast world.
Oh, I know. My daughter, everything is Instagram, and
yes,
everything's fast.
Yes.
She's used to getting information so quickly and just sound bites of information. And,
yes.
And she's not focused on watching something for an hour on her phone or on television. Everything is fast.
Yes. In fact, Deborah Mash was talking to us, our producer, before we started about how intentional we have to be to even change the course and the direction of our lives, because we move so fast. And that leads us to this biblical feast, the biblical feast of Shabbat.
Yes.
So explain what that is for all of those that are listening, and especially for those of us who grew up not knowing and fully understanding the feast.
Well, first of all, Kevin, Shabbat is one of the biblical feasts. And oftentimes that it's missed because we think we know the ones that are on the calendar, such as Passover and First Fruits, or we've heard of the Feast of Tabernacles, and they tend to fall at certain times of the year. But Shabbat is like, that's a feast? Well, yes, it's in Leviticus 23 as well. It's a feast of the Lord. So it's something that he's passionate about. That's a facet of his heart. And that's why we're going to focus on it today, because the whole point of focusing on these feasts is that we want to connect and align ourselves, our heart, with what is on God's heart, the facets of his heart, the facets of the stone. So Shabbat is a time of rest. It's external rest and internal rest. And it's, in terms of when does it happen, every week. So whereas the other feast is maybe once a year, Shabbat is every Friday, sundown, to Saturday, sundown. And the Jewish day always began at sundown. So that's why Shabbat begins Friday at sundown until Saturday at sundown. And it's an incredible picture of God, a revelation of God, of his heart. Because we can have misperceptions of him that he's a slave driver, or that he puts pressure on us. And Shabbat tells us that God actually cares about our rest. He's not a slave driver. He took a day of rest when he created the world, so if he can take a day of rest, can't we? And it really, I believe, Shabbat challenges our faith and challenges our trust. And where are we putting our trust? It really opens up that question, I know in my life, with am I trusting my own abilities to get things done, or am I trusting that God will enable me to get things done?
What's exciting is I've been hearing in certain parts of the country that Shabbat services are actually springing up everywhere.
Yes.
Rabbi Landry has one on Friday night. It's a streaming service. It's a beautiful service that you can watch online at House of David. And I see these services, and growing up, I never went to a service. On Friday night was movie night. You know, that was the time that we would go out and play. But it's become a time of real sacred joy, peace, and even celebration.
Yes, exactly, Kevin. I've noticed that myself. And part of it is this, what I see with all the feasts, because I've been teaching on the feast for quite a while, and I see it increasing every year, more and more interest in the church for the feast.
Yes.
And I believe that's the Holy Spirit working in our hearts to prepare us for Yeshua's return. Because we will be celebrating Shabbat with him. Ezekiel tells us all the feasts, and Shabbat is one of them that's mentioned, when he returns and throughout the millennium. So it's a part of practicing for the future, but also, as with all the feasts, as I mentioned earlier, they are appointments with God. Feast in Hebrew means moedim, which is an appointment with God. So it's a time that he has set aside to meet with you in a very special way, for you to experience intimacy with him, increase blessing. And so as you're seeing this trend, it's because as people do observe the feast and Shabbat, they're experiencing more intimacy with him, they're experiencing more blessing, and it's growing because they're seeing the benefits, in a sense, to what God has commanded from the beginning.
I love that, because this appointment with God thing that you're talking about, you know, we make appointments with each other. Jeannie, I can call you at 9 o'clock,
Right.
10 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Hey, I need Al to go meet with, and what we're doing is we're scheduling. We don't schedule God into our lives.
Right.
We don't say, God, we need to have an appointment with you. Would like to share with you, here's the things that we don't understand, we're confused about, and have that dialogue. And he's waiting there to
Right.
receive it, to experience that with us.
I have that daily quiet time with him every morning for at least an hour. And if I didn't have that, I'd be a mess throughout the day. I need that time to kind of restructure how I think, how I feel, to get God's heart toward the people in my life, toward the situations in my life, and to remind myself that all he wants is me. If I focus on intimacy with him and making sure that I'm dealing with what blocks intimacy with him, just knowing that all he wants is me, then I'm not focused on everything that has to get done. And Shabbat's very similar in that we have to trust him that if we take a day off from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, that we're not going to fall apart, that our lives aren't going to fall apart, that our jobs aren't going to fall apart, that he will provide for us. So it's almost like a tithe in a way of saying, I will give this one day out of 7 to you because every day is from you anyway. And so it's recognizing that really everything we have comes from God. The job that we have is given to us from God. The ability to do the job is given to us from God. So it's really recognizing where we have received everything is not our own strength, but from God.
I want to, in this next segment, talk a little bit more with you about this whole idea of, and I made a note of it, eternal rest. Boy, we all need that, don't we? And I can tell you this, in just a few moments, you're going to get to hear about how these biblical feasts can apply to your life. We have a complete series of all 7 feasts of the Lord that Jeanne Nigro has created just for you, and with some special bonus items that you'll really enjoy. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a few moments to talk more about what it means to have rest. Stay tuned.
Most of us agree that there's so much about the Bible we don't know or even completely understand. Stories and people from a long time ago that document who God is, each providing a roadmap of how we are to live and who we are to God. Throughout the Bible, there are stories of feasts. Many are still observed today, especially within the Jewish culture. But very few of us know much about the feasts, and even less about the significance of what the feasts say about who God is.
Studying our Jewish roots in the biblical feast is so important, and Jeanne Nigro has created a CD series we believe can impact your life. You see, it helps us understand the facets of God's heart.
Author and teacher Jeanne Nigro travels the world teaching about the biblical feasts, the extraordinary way God reveals himself to us through the feasts, and the difference those truths can have in our lives.
Maybe you've been asking yourself this question: how could my family become more involved in the biblical feast? How could we learn and teach our children even more about these special traditions that were not created by the Jewish people, but by God? You see, it was His plan to design these biblical feasts so that you could be a part. This entire series is designed just for you, for your church, for your group, your small group. It's a time when you can come together and really learn the facets of God's heart. We're so excited about the biblical feast. Today, make the decision that you're going to be involved as well.
Understanding the biblical feasts is one way to know God in a deeper and richer way. To learn more about this fascinating teaching, get the full CD series, The Biblical Feasts, at JeanneNigro.com. This is a teaching you'll want to have and share with others. The Biblical Feasts by Jeanne Nigro, available at JeanneNigro.com.
Welcome back to Facets of the Stone. Jeanne, in that first segment, we talked about really stopping, slowing down, having this divine appointment with God and keeping that appointment. Talk to us about this internal rest that you were describing.
Yes, internal rest, Kevin, is something that the Lord revealed to me when I've prayed with all the feasts. I always pray, how can I apply this in my life?
Right.
Because they tell us so much about who God is and how he sees us. And so one of the things that he put on my heart was how we can apply Shabbat, not just really Friday to Saturday, but every moment of the week, is not just external rest, like stopping from working, but experiencing an internal rest with God all throughout the week. And internal rest to me, Kevin, would refer to not experiencing stress all the time. You know, we are live in such a stressed culture.
We do.
And the Bible says do not fear, but it never says do not stress. So we don't think of it as sin. We think of it as almost like a culturally acceptable norm right now. You're just supposed to be stressed. That's the way life is. Everybody's stressed. But yet behind stress is always something we're believing that we have to be in control, or we have to hold everything together, or that God's not with us. And his will for us is not to experience stress.
It's really true, and I can tell you, I am the worst about stress. Last year, I had 12 strokes based upon having too much stress.
Yes.
And all of that stress coming down left me literally laying on my back porch, ended up going to the hospital, 6 days in ICU, and living through being crippled for 16 days. And in that process, I learned, I can't go fast anymore. I'm in a wheelchair. God got my attention.
Yeah.
I believe with all of my heart it was a literal attack from the enemy to try to discourage and stop. And I think a lot of people go through that. And I had this extended Shabbat period of asking, questioning, understanding what God was saying to me. And I can tell you, it does change you when you go through something like
Absolutely.
that. And you're forced to slow down.
Yes.
Because there's something he wants to teach you. And it seems like in Shabbat, in this biblical feast, that would be a real reward that you would have coming out of these weekly experiences.
Yes, I mean, his heart is to protect us. And so he's not going to put this extra stress on you or burdens on you or expect you to carry all the burdens.
Right.
And I think we tend to do that.
We do. We want
carry
it.
all the burdens, and then we wonder why we're so burnt out and stressed.
Yes.
And think that, and when I've asked God to show me what I'm believing, he said, deep down in your heart, now you're not aware of this, Jeannie, but deep down in your heart, you're believing that you have to carry the burdens, that I can't carry them for you or something. And I was like, you mean you really want to carry my burdens, Lord? And he said, yes. His yoke is easy. When I get stressed out and I'm not feeling internal peace or internal rest, Kevin, what I always think of is from Matthew, his yoke is easy and his burden is light.
Very light.
So if I'm not experiencing that his yoke is easy and his burden is light, I ask the Lord to show me what burden am I carrying that's not mine to carry.
I remember at House of David when I went in to have a Shabbat service, they said Shabbat Shalom.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Shabbat Shalom, it's Shabbat, have a peaceful, Shalom is very similar to Shabbat in the sense that it all has to do with completeness and restoration and wholeness.
God's
and
peace
so
to
Shabbat,
us.
yes, it's like peace to you, complete peace. And that's his will for us. That's his heart, connecting with the facets of his heart.
It's a reminder, isn't it?
Yes, he's always with all the feasts, reminding us of an aspect of him that we tend to forget because we get on our treadmills of life and we think we're in control that we have to be in control of everything. And God's saying, but I want to carry your burdens for you. My heart for you, and he's saying to me and God's saying to you, God's heart for you is to experience internal rest, peace, not to be in stress all the time. Stress just blocks us from intimacy with him.
You know, we think about the children of Israel and how they wandered for 40 years in the desert, how they went through so many problems, so many trials after Sinai, all of these, when will we get into the promised land? And they would just be, whatever the wind of doctrine they would sway toward, whatever the teaching was. And it seems like that they lost their way so many times, and I think we do the same thing every day, even today.
Hebrews tells us exactly, it's talking about the Israelites, but we can apply it, that they did not experience rest because of their unbelief. And that unbelief in our lives comes from, I believe, misperceptions of God. Believing lies, or even if, the thing about when I say lies, I know many of you might be saying, well, I don't believe lies about God, because I would say the same thing. We're not aware of them. If someone would come up to you and say, what lie do you believe about God? It's like, well, I don't believe lies, but why would I believe lies about God? I'm a Christian.
Right.
And so we're not aware of them. We're not like we're walking around thinking about them. And we're not choosing to believe lies about God. But they are beliefs in our heart that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, it's like we don't know what we don't know.
Out. Yes, we don't know. We don't know. They're deep down in our hearts. We're acting out of them, and they're oftentimes based on old messages
or myths
that we that we received about ourselves, or teaching at different churches or radio programs or whatever, where you're just picking up on a description of God that is not accurate, or a description of God that was not how he revealed himself. Maybe it's how the culture defined him, but not how he defined himself or revealed himself. So that's what I mean by lies about God. It's these beliefs in our heart that we're not even aware of, but yet we act out of. Because you think about it, Kevin, if you truly believed that God was carrying every burden,
right,
that he was with you every minute, would you ever stress?
You really wouldn't. And I can tell you this, the best way you can find out and understand even more about these teachings is Jeanne has prepared a very special CD series called Biblical Feast. And it's the applications of God's Word, the Bible, taught in Leviticus, all the way through the New Testament to help you understand how you can connect with God's heart. We want to focus on that for just a few minutes. We're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the millennium. We're going to talk about how this relates to the facets of God's heart. So we want to encourage you to stay with us. We'll be right back.
Most of us agree that there's so much about the Bible we don't know or even completely understand. Stories and people from a long time ago that document who God is, each providing a roadmap of how we are to live and who we are to God. Throughout the Bible, there are stories of feasts. Many are still observed today, especially within the Jewish culture. But very few of us know much about the feasts, and even less about the significance of what the feasts say about who God is.
Studying our Jewish roots in the biblical feast is so important, and Jeanne Nigro has created a CD series we believe can impact your life. You see, it helps us understand the facets of God's heart.
Author and teacher Jeanne Nigro travels the world teaching about the biblical feasts, the extraordinary way God reveals himself to us through the feasts, and the difference those truths can have in our lives.
Maybe you've been asking yourself this question: how could my family become more involved in the biblical feast? How could we learn and teach our children even more about these special traditions that were not created by the Jewish people, but by God? You see, it was His plan to design these biblical feasts so that you could be a part. This entire series is designed just for you, for your church, for your group, your small group. It's a time when you can come together and really learn the facets of God's heart. We're so excited about the biblical feast. Today, make the decision that you're going to be involved as well.
Understanding the biblical feasts is one way to know God in a deeper and richer way. To learn more about this fascinating teaching, get the full CD series, The Biblical Feasts, at JeanneNigro.com. This is a teaching you'll want to have and share with others. The Biblical Feasts by Jeanne Nigro, available at JeanneNigro.com.
Welcome back to Facets of the Stone. I'm with Jeanne Nigro, and Jeanne, we've been talking about what it means to slow down, to rest, to have a Shabbat, and to really understand Shabbat. I'd like to take this last few moments that we have with you to talk and have you share with everyone watching and viewing, me as well, how Shabbat can be a part of our weekly experience in connecting with God.
Well, we can have it as part of our day-to-day experience,
Yes.
as I mentioned, by experiencing his rest internally.
Yes.
And being aware of the stress and what we're believing about him, and really deal with that, confess that, and ask God to show you what you're believing so that you can experience that internal rest all week long.
Is that like a daily Bible study time? Is that kind of what you're talking about?
No, I wouldn't say daily Bible. Well, obviously, it's important to have a quiet time.
Right.
Definitely.
Okay.
But I would say just being aware throughout the day of when you're feeling stressed.
I see.
That's an easy place to start.
Okay.
You have lots of opportunities to practice. And as you're feeling stressed, Kevin, just ask God, what am I believing about you? What am I believing about myself? And he'll reveal that to you and confess that as sin and say, Lord, help me to see myself as you see me, or help me to see the truth about this, or what burden am I carrying that's not mine to carry? So that's a way of experiencing that Shabbat, that internal rest throughout the week. But then I would encourage you on the weekly Shabbat, the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, to take that time with your family on Friday evenings. And there's many resources, and I've got resources available as well in our ministry for prayers and the blessing. It's just beautiful blessings, Kevin. We've got the candles here to remind us of the 2 candles to remember Shabbat and to observe Shabbat. And there's a blessing over the children and a blessing over the wife, and it's just a beautiful time of blessing. And just to recognize that God, everything we have is from God. And then to trust, it's a challenge. To trust that if I don't work for a day, or if I focus on Bible study for a day, or just focus on the Lord, or have the family together and go to a Shabbat service at a Messianic congregation. All of the Messianic congregations have services on Saturday morning, Shabbat morning. And it's just a beautiful way of connecting with God, of that special appointment with God where you experience him and experience his blessings in a deeper way. Of course, it's not a determinant of our salvation, only Yeshua, but it's a way of experiencing more intimacy and blessing from God.
It's like starting kind of wide and being macro about everything about our relationship with us, with God in us, through us, inside of us, and then going down to the micro of minute by minute, moment by moment, dying to oneself and really truly living in him.
Yes.
And that is just that's so difficult because, that juxtaposition of light and dark that wars against all of us. Every day you can have this amazing mountaintop experience 1 second, and then the next second, it feels like the wheels are falling off, your life is crumbling, and we're one phone call or one conversation away from someone saying, you have cancer. You have something difficult that's going to happen in your life. Someone is going to not be there, a person that was there. It's like all of these storms that are coming around. I think this message of this biblical feast of rest is something that probably more than anything else other than our salvation, I think we need it.
We do, because we started out saying this culture is moving way too fast.
Right.
And it's giving us the message that we have to move fast or else we're slackers, we're losers or whatever. And when we connect with God's heart, though, then we realize, wait a minute, that message is not coming from God. That's coming from the enemy, because he's coming to kill, steal, and destroy. And if we live in constant stress, that will kill our bodies, and it will kill our relationships and our emotions. So God's heart is always toward life. And so he knows that rest is a part of life.
Yes.
Yeah.
It really is. If you were to say one thing to an individual who has been experiencing these feasts about Shabbat that you believe could guide them into a more meaningful Shabbat, what would you say?
I would say, one, as I mentioned, to observe it on Friday, to take that time, because it's a reminder of God's provision and his presence. But I would just encourage you to this whole idea that we've introduced here today of internal rest. Again, I think we're just such a stressed out culture, and it's become such the norm that if you can just be aware of, that's what I've done in my life. I've been aware of stress And I say, you have lots of opportunities to practice this all through the time you wake up in the morning. And sometimes I wake up and I think about what I have to get done that day, and that starts to stress me out. Before you're even in the shower, before you even get up, it's like, wait a minute. Fear is not from God. Stress is not from God. It's recognizing what's from God and what's not. And the enemy wants us to blame God for what he's trying to tell us. What the enemy is saying, fear or stress, and that's not from God. So I don't have to take this into my heart. So what do I do with it? What's behind it? What am I believing? And start there. What am I believing? And then, as he shows you, confess that as sin. And cancel that authority that you've given the enemy by believing a lie.
I think it's hard to cancel the authority, but it's so vital. Even in your book, when you talked about it in Unshaken, how if we don't take away that voice that speaks the negation over our lives, we're really allowing ourselves to be ripped off.
Yes.
We're allowing the joy of our lives to be compromised.
Yes. And Kevin, in my book Unshaken, and the resources available through our website, through the CDs and handouts that I have available, I have specific prayers that enable us or enable you to use your spiritual weapons of warfare, to confess and forgive and cancel Satan's authority. It's not hard. It's really actually, the truths of God are simple. I think the enemy tries to make us feel like they're complicated, but I'd encourage you to get these prayers, and that's what I do throughout the day. As I realize I'm stressed, I just prayers that you can just say under your voice or anywhere you are, believe me, because I'm always just there's something that's coming up where I have fear or stress, and I always have to confess that if you sin, I can do it. No one even knows I'm doing it, but I'm doing warfare in the heavenly places.
Absolutely. Well, we're so glad you joined us. Make sure and get those biblical feasts. We believe that they'll be a blessing to you. Go to JeanneNigro.com. God bless you. Have a great day.
If you've enjoyed today's show, Facets of the Stone, we encourage you to find out more about the ministry work of Jeanne Nigro at JeanneNigro.com. There you'll learn more about the teachings from today's show, as well as other insightful topics. The biblical feasts, breaking free, and many more. Jeanne Nigro's teachings are available on CD, as well as her new book, Unshaken. Also, check out when Jeanne will be teaching in a city near you. For more information or to help support the work of Jeanne Nigro Ministries, visit us at JeanneNigro.com. Teachings that impact your life. Teachings that help you grow deeper in your relationship with God. JeanneNigro.com.